to you. I hope you're having a great holiday season. Last month, if you watched the training video from last month, you'll know that we are actually this month doing the second part of our first ever two-part training video. So if you're new to clicking on these, or if you happen to miss last month, I would recommend that before you watch the November training, you go back and watch the October training, because that was the first part of what we're talking about. And what we're talking about this month and last month is the idea of how do we become great volunteers. If you're a volunteer, how do you become a great volunteer? Not a perfect volunteer, there's no such thing. And if you're a leader, if you're the youth pastor, and you have volunteers on your team, how do you kind of create a culture that allows leaders and volunteers to become great? And what are some characteristics that you can look for in volunteers as you're building your team? And I talked last week about 4 of those, and I'm not going to rehash those. You can go back and see those. But we're talking about 8 characteristics, and I want to take a look at the final 4 here today. Well, the 5th characteristic of what I think makes a great volunteer is this, is that a great volunteer is willing to take a bullet or 2. They'll take a bullet or 2. It's one of those things where it's real easy for volunteers. You know, when we think about youth ministry, stuff goes wrong all the time. All the time stuff goes wrong. And the natural tendency, I think it's human nature, is when something goes wrong, everybody just points to the guy in charge and says, well, talk to him, it was his fault. Talk to her, she was in charge. And a great volunteer is willing to take a bullet or 2 for the good of the team once in a while. Now, great volunteers, not only, they take the bullets that they deserve. In other words, a great volunteer, when they mess up, when they do something and a parent calls to complain, or they fail to follow through with something they said they would do, a great volunteer, they own that. It was their mistake. They own up to it. The other bullet that they're willing to take is every once in a while, a great volunteer will take a bullet that they didn't even deserve. It's a bullet that really was aimed at the youth pastor, or it was aimed at another volunteer. I can't tell you how many times a parent has walked into our junior high room upset about something, and some of them don't even know who I am. They walk up to the first adult presence they see and start complaining about something. And it's amazing to me how many of my volunteers will sit there and they'll take the bullet. They'll apologize to that parent. They'll explain that that wasn't our intent. They may not even know what was going on, but they'll hear that parent out. They'll take the hit, and they'll help kind of smooth that situation over. And then they'll come to me later on and tell me what was going on. But a great volunteer is one who's willing to take a bullet or 2 and not always deflecting it and kind of making sure that everybody's aiming at the big dog, because that's what he gets paid to do. He gets paid to take the hits. Great volunteers are willing to take a bullet or 2 when they need to. Another thing that great volunteers do is great volunteers, they see the cup as half full and they look to fill it. My best volunteers are the optimists. They're the ones who, they see a problem and they see the solution right away. Problems are just opportunities for God to do something great. When we go to camp and it's rainy, my best volunteers, instead of complaining about the rain, they suddenly come up with 5 reasons why rain at summer camp is a good thing. And they'll come up with games, and they'll come up with ideas, and they'll be prepared, and they see the cup is half full, and they look for ways to fill it to overflowing. Everybody loves an encourager. Everybody loves an encourager. When you look in Scripture and you see Barnabas, they gave him that nickname because he was known for being such an encourager, and they loved it. The early church benefited from his encouragement. And I'm not sure if I've ever met anyone who has felt like, the people around me are just too encouraging. They're just too optimistic. They believe in me too much. They love our ministry too much. Great volunteers are optimistic and they see the cup as half full. Now, it doesn't mean there's not a place to be critical. There is a place for critical thinking and for debriefing and for sharing concerns. But a great volunteer recognizes the timing, when that's appropriate, when it's not, and great volunteers are optimistic, they're cheerleaders, they see the cup as half full, they look for ways to fill it even more. Another thing great volunteers do is, really this is one that great volunteers don't do. This is an opposite, is great volunteers don't want to be me. Great volunteers love the fact that they're just that. They're great volunteers. My best volunteers really don't feel called to full-time ministry. They're not trying to earn a place at the church. They love the career they have. They love their family. They love their life stage. And they just want to be a volunteer in our ministry. And they want to leave all the other stuff to me. They don't look at me and think, oh man, how can I get where he is? and they're not kind of wrestling in and trying to look for ways to kind of take over the youth group, and they're not looking for ways to kind of put me down so they can look better, and they don't want all that. They just want to be a great volunteer, and they want to support me as a leader. Now, a lot of leaders take advantage of that. A lot of leaders make sure that there's a big separation. I don't think that's the healthiest thing. I want my volunteers to own ministry. I want them to take initiative. I want them to feel empowered as youth workers. But I don't want them to want to be me, because I'm me. So I hope that makes sense, is that the best volunteers love being simply that. They love being volunteers. They make more money than I do anyway. They have more free time than I do, and they love that. So not only are the best volunteers not wanting to be me, but the smartest volunteers, they don't want to be me either. They love being who they are in their role in our ministry. And then a final thing that great volunteers do is great volunteers stick it out. They hang in there. I mean, you know how often you go home at night and you just feel like cashing in the chips. It's time to give it back. It's time to give it up. The Bible study didn't go well. The event, you wanted 20 kids to show up and 2 students showed up and they complained the whole time. And you just go home and you think, what did I get myself into? Pretty good volunteers stick around for a year. I mean, if we have a volunteer who sticks around for a year, that's a pretty good run in youth ministry, because it is so draining. Great volunteers stick it out even longer. They stick around. And some of our great volunteers only stay a year, but if you look back at that year was marked by plenty of opportunities for them to bail out. They had a tough small group. They had a parent who was unfairly angry with them. I may have not valued them well enough. And if you look back at that year, there was plenty of places along that calendar year for them to jump off the ship, and they stuck it out. And great volunteers stick it out. Just last night, we trained our volunteers, and I said, good volunteers know how to bounce back. You're going to have a setback, you just got to know how to bounce back. And you're going to have times where you feel like cashing it in, and you just need to hang in there. Great volunteers stick it out. So just to recap, the 8 things that great volunteers do is, great volunteers lead from the middle, they know their skin and they're comfortable in it, they praise in public and they pound in private, they take the initiative, they take a bullet or two, they see the cup as half full and they look to fill it, they don't want to be me, and they stick it out. I hope that the last 2 months has been beneficial to you. As you wrap this up, just like you did last month, you might want to look at these 4 and kind of just go through those and evaluate where your strengths and weaknesses might lie. I know you're doing good thing. You've heard me say this lots of times, that junior high ministry, it's a pretty simple formula. It really is. It's caring adult plus junior high student equals good ministry. That's the formula. You're doing it. You're doing it well. I hope these tips and these thoughts will spur you to greatness in your ministry. Take care.